はい、レベル48でしたね。まあ、やっていきます。ちゃ。はい、また、ゲームをしながら適当に、文を読んでいきます。いけるかな。こんにちは。ちょっと適当に音読をしながらドラクエ進めていくというものです。何かそのコメントをしてくださったそのコメントについてのお話はできるかもしれません。適当にレベル上げをするだけなので、はい、ちょっと遊びに来てくださってとても感謝です。というわけで、残って一瞬で逃げちゃいましたね。そうですね。レベル48、9ってタイトル書いたんですが、レベル48でした。ちょっとこれは作戦で全員でバッチリ頑張るんですね。どんどん。いや、呪文使うのがいいのかな。呪文使うのにしようかな。それはいいかもしれない。呪文を使わずに賢者の人がね、いっぱい使うようだったら、それが一番いい気がしないな。それやってみるか。作戦で、なんだっけ、作戦が、全員、呪文使うな。で、このポンスさん、トミーさんだけ、呪文使うんでしょ。これはバッチリ頑張りにして、トミーさんは命大事にしよう。ポンスさんは呪文使わないしよう。これでやってみようか。これでいいかな。これでなんかいろんな攻撃をしてくれますね。Occurred at 10 p.m. and the next day the routine starts over again. Oh, and there are no weekend, no breaks as meals, and virtually no contact with family and friends outside of West Point. When Kenneth's description beats a challenge in a variety of ways in every developmental area, mentally, physically, militarily, and socially, the system will find your weaknesses, but at that point, West Point helped you, so who made it through beast? It was 2004 in my second year of graduate school in psychology when I set about answering that question. But for decades, the US Army has been asking the same thing. In fact, it was in 1955, almost 15 years before I began working. The puzzle, psychological. Jerry Kerrigan was dropping into the Army, ordered to report to West Point, and decided to test new cadets for the purpose of identifying who would stay and who would leave. As fate would have it, Jerry was not only the first psychologist to study dropping out at West Point, he was also the first psychologist and met and encouraged. I entered and working part-time in his lab for 2 years. An effort to separate the wheat from the chaff after West Point dramatically successful record in particular spending hours showing cadets printed with pictures asking the young man to make a story to fit them. This test was meant to unearth deep-seated unconscious motives, and the general idea was that cadets would visualize noble deeds and accomplishments should be the ones who would graduate instead of dropping out. Like that sounds good in principle, this one didn't work so well in practice. The stories they told were colorful and fun to listen, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the decisions the cadet may actually live. Since then, several more generations of psychologists devoted themselves to that issue, but not one researcher could say with certainty. The training had just begun. Soon after learning about the beast, I found Officer Matthews, a military psychologist member for years. I explained that a mission was processed to successfully identify many women. Mission staff calculated for each applicant the whole candidate score and weighted averages SAT or ACT exam scores. High school rank adjusted for the number of students in the applicant's graduating class, expert appraisal of leadership potential, and performance on objective measures of physical fitness. You can think of the whole candidate score as West Point's best guess at how much talent applicants have for the diverse, rigorous 4-year program. In other words, it's an estimate of how easily cadets will master the many skills required military leader for candidate score is the single most important factor in West Point admissions, yet it didn't really predict who and in fact, cadets with the highest whole candidate score are just as likely to drop as those with the lowest. Open to me, who had their own experience joining the Air Force, a young man, Mike had glued to the riddle. While the rigors of interaction went quite as harrowing as those of West Point, there were notable similarities. The most important were challenges that exceeded current skills. For the first time in their lives, my inadequate crew being asked on an hourly basis to do things they couldn't get to do. With 2 weeks, Mike recalls, I was tired, lonely, frustrated, and ready to quit all my classes. Some did quit, but many did not. What struck Michael was rising to the occasion. Almost nothing to do with talent. Those who drop out of training rarely did so from lack of ability. Rather, what mattered, Mike said, was a never give up attitude. Around that time, it wasn't just Mike Matthews who was talking to me about this kind of hanging their posture to challenge. As graduate students just beginning to probe the psychology of success, our interview business, athletics, journalism, academia, medicine, and law, who are the people very top of the hill and what they like you think makes them special. Some of the characteristics the interviews are very few specific. For instance, more than one business person mentioned financial risks, calculate decisions about millions of dollars and still go to sleep at night, but seemed entirely beside the point for athletes who instead mentioned a drive to create. I don't know, but I do. In contrast, athletes mentioned a different kind of motivation, one driven by the thrill of victory. One has loved to go with the people. Winners hate losing. In addition to these particulars, these very certain commonalities, and they were what interested me most. No matter the field, the most successful people were lucky and talented. I heard that before, and I didn't doubt it, but a story of success didn't get there. Many of people have talked also recount tales of rising star to everyone's surprise, dropped out those interests, realize the potential apparently is critically important, and not at all easy to keep going after failure. Some great things are going well, but falling apart. But right at the beginning, I mean, we lose the story because writing was so clumsy and melodramatic. But he got better and better. And last year he won the Guggenheim, and the encouraged Raymond to improve. Is early by now, but she's own house sheds critic. The perseverance. Harry partners so dogged in their pursuits. For most, there was no realistic expectation of ever catching up to their ambitions. In the old nights, good enough. Real sense, they were satisfied being unsatisfied. Each was changing something of a taste as much as a capture that was gratifying. Even if some of the things they had to do were boring, or frustrating, or even painful, they wouldn't dream of giving up. Their passion was enduring. In some, no matter the domain, the highly successful had a kind of ferocious determination that played out into two ways. First, these exemplars were usually resilient and hard-working. Very deep way. They not only had a determination, they had direction. It was this combination of passion and perseverance that made high achievers special. In a world they had greed. For me, the question became, how do you measure something so intangible, something that decades of military psychologists hadn't been able to quantify? Something those very successful people are interviews said that to recognize on site directly. Question that captured sometimes verbatim description of what it means to have greed. Half of the questions were about perseverance. They asked how much you agree with statement like overcome the setbacks and conquer important challenge, and I finish whatever I began. The other half of the questions were about the passion. They asked whether your interests change from year to year and the extent to which you have been obsessed with a certain idea or project for a short time, but later lost interest. What emerged great skill. Test when taken a measure exists which approach peace. Cadets down to take the great skill. The day before, cadets does a farewell for which West Point allocates exactly 19 per second. Said, gotten shapes, just a man, changed out civilian clothing and into the famous gray and the West uniform and receiving foot lockers, helmets, and other gear. And may have mistakenly solved the little knew how, instructed by a four-haired cadet in the proper way, to stand in the line, step up my line, not on line, not over my line, behind my line, step up my line. Initially, I looked to see how great scores lined up with the aptitude. Guess what? Great score bore absolutely no relationship to the whole candidate score that had been so painstakingly calculated. In other words, how talented a cadet was said nothing about their grade, and vice versa. The separation of grades from talent was consistent with Mike's observation of Air Force training. With a stumble onto the finding, the real surprise. After all, why shouldn't the talented endure? Logically, the talented should stick around and try hard. West Point, for example, among the cadets who ultimately make it through Beast, the whole candidate score is a marvelous predictor of every metric West Point tracks. It's not only academic grade, but military and physical fitness marked as well. So it's surprising, really, that talent is no guarantee of grade. And this book will explore the reasons why. By the last day of the Beast, 71 cadets have dropped out. It turned out to be an outstandingly reliable predictor of who made it through and who did not. The next year, I returned to West Point for the same study. This time, 62 cadets dropped out of Beast again for Wednesday. No differences. So, for the Beast, note the CT scores, not your high school rank, not your leadership experience, not your athletic ability. Whole candidate score. But that's great. This point. Find out. I looked for other situations, so challenging, and a lot of people drop out. I wanted to know whether it was just a rigorous beast that mean. In general, grades help people stick to their commitments. Where next area was tested grades power and sales, a profession in which the daily, if not rejection power for cause. I asked hundreds of men and women employed at same vacation timeshare company to answer a battery of personality questionnaires, including the grade scale. 6 months later, I revisited the company, by which time 55% of salespeople moreover, personality trait, including exploration, emotional stability, and conscientiousness, was as effective as grade predicted attention. Around the same time, I received a call from the Chicago public schools, like the psychologists at West Point. Researchers there were eager to learn more about the students who successfully earned their high school diplomas. That spring, thousands of high school juniors completed an abbreviated grade scale along with a battery of questionnaires. More than a year later, 12% of those students failed to graduate. Students who graduate how much students cared about school, how conscientious they were about their studies, and even how safe they felt at school. And likewise, in 2 large American samples, I found the more likely to get further in their formal schooling. JD greedier than graduate from 4-year college, who returned earlier than those who accumulated some college credits but no degree. Interestingly, adults who successfully earned degrees from 2-year colleges scored slightly higher than the graduates of 4-year colleges. This puzzled me at first, but I soon learned that the dropout rates at community colleges can be as high as 80%. Those who define the odds as especially greedy In parallel, I studied partnership with the Army Special Operations Forces, better known as Green Berets, with among the Army's best trained soldiers, assigned some of the toughest and most dangerous missions. Training for the Green Berets is a grueling, multi-stage affair. It comes after 9 weeks of boot camp, 4 weeks in infantry training, 3 weeks airborne school, and 4 weeks of preparation, focus on land and navigation. All these preliminary training experiences are very, very hard, and at every stage there are men who don't make it through. But the Special Forces selection course is even harder. In the words of its commanding general, James Parker, this is where we will decide who will and will not enter the final stages of Green Beret training. This selection course makes a beast barracks look like some vacation. Starting before dawn, the training goes for first until 9 evening. In addition to daytime and nighttime navigation exercises for 6 months, sometimes under the 65-pound on the temps at the obstacle, known as Nest-Nick, which includes crawling through water and barbed wire, walking on elevated logs, negotiating cargo nets, swinging from horizontal ladders. Just getting to the selection of course is an accomplishment, but even so, 42% of the candidates I studied voluntarily withdrew before it was over. So what distinguished the man who made it through? Greed. What else other than greed predict success in the military, education, and business? In sales, I found that prior experience helps. Novices are less likely to keep their jobs than those with experience. In the Chicago public school system, the supporting teacher made it more likely that students would graduate. And for aspiring Green Berets, baseline physical fitness at the start of training is essential. But in each of these domains, when you compare people matched on these characteristics, it still predicts, regardless of specific attribute advantages that help them succeed in each of the diverse domains of challenge. Great matters in all of them. The year I started graduate school, the documentary Spellbound was released. The film followed 3 boys and 5 girls as they prepare for the compete in the finals of the Scripps National Spelling Bee. To get the finals, and Adrian Field's 3 days affair staged annually in Washington, D.C., and broadcast live on ESPN, which normally focuses its programming on high stakes or sports matchups. These kids must first outspell thousands of other students from hundreds of schools across the country. This means spelling increasingly obscure words without a single error. In round after round, first besting all other students consistent rather than in their grade, school district, and region. Spellbound got me wondering to what extent is fireflies with spelling words like shattering symmetry as a matter of precocious verbal talent, and to what extent great at the playing. I call the Beast executive academic woman and the former champion speller herself can give her efforts to learn more about the psychological mega winners. She agreed to send out questionnaires to all 273 spellers just as soon as they qualify for the finals, which would take place several months later. In return for the princely reward of 25 gift card, about 2/3 of the spellers returned the questionnaires to my lab. The oldest respondent was 15 years old, the absolute age limit according to competition rules, and the youngest was just 7. In addition, aggressive scale spellers reported how much time they devoted to spelling practice. On average, more than an hour a day on weekdays and more than 2 hours a day on weekends. But there was a lot of variation around these averages. Some spellers were hardly studying at all, and some were studying as much as 9 hours on a given Saturday. Separately, I conducted a subsample of spellers and administered the verbal intelligence test. As a group, the spellers demonstrated unusual verbal ability, but a fairly wide range of score, with some kids score the prodigy level and others average for their age. When the SBN aired the final rounds of the competition, I watched all the way through the concluding suspenseful moment. Today's 40 catch-up corrective spelled P-P-O-G-U-R-A, a musical term for a kind of race, to win the championship. Then, with the final rankings in hand, I analyzed my data. Here's what I found. Measurements of grade taken months before the final competition predicted how well spellers eventually perform. Put simply, greater kids went further in competition. How did they do it? By studying many more hours and also competing in more spelling bees. But about talent, verbal intelligence also predicted getting further in competition. But there was no relationship at all between verbal IQ and because much more verbally talented spellers did not study any more than less able spellers, nor did they have a longer track record of competition. The separation of grade and talent emerged again as separate undergraduate, and their stated scores and grades were, in fact, inversely correlated. Students in that selected sample who had higher SAT score, or average, the slightly less grade. Putting together, defining with the other data I collected, I came to fundamental insight that our potential is one thing, what we do is quite another. I was a teacher. Began to see that talent is not all their achievement. I quit my job at McKinsey, a global management consulting firm, whose New York City office occupied several floors of blue glass skyscraper in Midtown. My colleagues were a bit bewildered by the decision. Why leave a company that most of my peers were dying to join? When regularly singled out as one of the world's smartest and most influential, acquaintances assumed I was very age for that lifestyle. But of course, anyone who's been a teacher knows that there's no harder job in the world. In some ways, it was consulting, not teaching, that was detour. Throughout college, I tutored and mentored kids from the local public schools. After graduation, I started tuition for academic enriching program and granted for 2 years. Then I went to Oxford and completed a degree in neuroscience, studying the neural mechanisms, dyslexia. So, when I started teaching, I felt like I was back on track. Even so, the transition was abrupt. In a single week, my salary went from seriously, I actually get paid this much, to wow, how the heck do teachers in this city make ends meet? Dinner was now a sandwich, narrated by graduating papers, no sushi order at the client's expense. I commuted to work on the same subway line, I stayed on train past Midtown, getting on 6 stops farther south, the Lower East Side. Instead of pumps, pearls, and a tailored suit, I wore sensible shoes I could stand in all day and dresses I wouldn't mind getting covered in chalk. My students were 12 and 13 years old. Most lived in the housing projects. Classes between Apr and D and before the neighborhood sprouted heat campuses on every corner. Before I started teaching there, our school was picked for the set of movie about Lapantambor School, and my job was to help my students learn 7th grade math, fraction and decimals, and rudimentary building blocks of the algebra and geometry. Even that first week, it was obvious that some of my students picked up the mathematical concepts more easily than their classmates. Teaching the most talented students in the class was a joy. They were quite literally quick studies without much prompting. We saw an underlying pattern in the series of math problems that less able students struggle to grasp. They watch me to do a problem once on the board and say, "I get it." I then work out the next one correctly and yet at the end of the first marking period, I was surprised to find that some of the very students weren't doing as well as I'd expected. Some did very well, of course, but more than few of my most talented students were earning lackluster grades, or worse. In contrast, several of the students initially struggled to faring better than expected. These overachievers will reliably come to class every day with every looking at the window. They took notes and asked questions when they didn't get something the first time around. They tried again, sometimes coming for extra help during the lunch period or during afternoon electives. Their hard work showed in the grades. Apparently, aptitude did not guarantee achievement. Talent for math was different from excelling in math class. This came as a surprise. After all, conventional wisdom says that math is a subject in which more talented students are expected to excel, leaving classmates who are simply not math people behind. I began the school year with that very assumption. It seemed a sure bet that those for whom easily will continue to outpace their classmates. In fact, I expected that the achievement gap separating the natural from the rest of the class would only widen over time. I've been distracted by talent. Gradually, listen in concept. There's a jail. Could be the longer. Could it be needed to find a different way to explain it or the trial to get it across before jumping to the conclusion. The talent. Teacher wasn't the response. Figure out how to sustain the effort. Just a bit longer. At the same time, I began to reflect on how smart even my weakest students sounded when they talked about things that genuinely interested in them. These were conversations I found almost everyone's possible to follow. Discourses on basketball to statistics, the latest songs I really liked, and complicated plot lines about who is no longer speaking to whom and why. When I got to know my students better, I discovered that all of them had mastered any number of complicated ideas of very complicated daily lives. Honestly, was getting exiled by itself in algebraic equation all that much harder? My students weren't equally talented. Still, when it comes to learning 7th grade math, could be the master sufficient effort over time that get to where they needed. Surely, I thought, they are all talented. Toward the end of school year, my fiancé became my husband. For the sake of this almost Mackenzie career, we packed and moved from New York to San Francisco. I found a new job teaching math at a lower high school. Lower is the classroom. Lower is an alternate universe, tucked away in the perpetually foggy basin near the Pacific Ocean. Lower is the only public high school in San Francisco. Admits a student on the academic merit, the largest feeder to the University of the California system. Graduate to the country's most selective universities. Your East Coast, you can think of Lowell as a established San Francisco. Such imagery might bring to mind with kids who leaps and bounds smarter than those who lack of top-notch test scores and grades to get in. What I discovered was that lower students were distinguished more than their assets by their intelligence. I once asked students in my homeroom how much they studied. The typical answer? Hours and hours. Not in a week, but in a single day. Still, like at any other school, there were tremendous variation in how hard students worked and how well they performed. Just as I found in New York, some of their students I expected to excel because math came so easy to them, to these words and classmates. On the other hand, some of my hardest workers were concentrated in my highest performers on tests on the quizzes. One of these very hard workers, David Long. David was in my freshman algebra class. There were two kinds of algebra classes, a lower accelerated track led and advanced placement calculus by senior year, and the regular track which I was teaching didn't. The students in my class hadn't scored high enough on Lauer's math placement exam to get into the accelerated track. David didn't stand out at first, but every time I graded an assignment, David had turned perfect work. Quizzes and tests, when I marked one of his answers as incorrect, it was more often my error was than this. Wow, he was just so hungry to learn. In class, his attention was rapt. After class, he'd stay and ask politely for harder assignments. I began to wonder what the heck this kid was doing in my class. Once I understood how ridiculous the situation was, I marched David into the office of my department chair. It didn't take long to explain what was going on. Fortunately, the chair was a wise and wonderful teacher who placed the higher value of kids and on bureaucratic rules. And paperwork to save David out of my class and in the accelerated track. My loss, teacher's gain. Of course, there were ups and downs, and not all David's math grades of A. After I left your class, I switched into the most advanced one. I was a little behind. David later told me, and the next year, math, it was geometry, continued to be hard. I didn't get an A, I got a B. In the next class, his first math test came back with a D. How did you deal with that? I asked. I did feel bad. I did, but I didn't dwell on it. I knew it was done.
I knew I had to focus on what to do next. So I went to my teacher and asked for help. I basically tried to figure out, what I did wrong, what I need to do differently. By senior year, David was taking the harder of rounds 2 hours of courses in spring. He earned a perfect 5 out of 5 at the advanced placement exam. After Lowell, David attended a small college graduate with dual degrees in engineering and economics. I sat with the parents at the graduation, remembering the quiet student in the back of my classroom who ended up proving that aptitude tests can get a lot of things wrong. 2 years ago, David earned a PhD in mechanical engineering. UCLA. The dissertation was on optimal performance algorithm for the thermodynamic processes in track and engines. In English, David used math to help make engines more efficient. Today, he's an engineer at the Aerospace Corporation. Quite literally, the boy who is not ready for the harder, faster math classes is now a rocket scientist. During the next several years of teaching, I grew less and less convinced, destiny and more intrigued by the return generated by effort, intent on plumbing the depths of the mystery. I eventually left teaching and became a psychologist. When I got to graduate school, I learned that psychologists have long wondered why some people succeed and others fail. Among the earliest was Francis Galton, who debated the topic with his half-cousin Charles Darwin. By all accounts, Galton was a child prodigy. By 4, he could read and write. By 6, he knew Latin and long division, and could recite passages from Shakespeare by heart. Learning came easy. In 1869, Galton published his first scientific study on the origins of high achievement. After assembling a list of well-known figures in science, athletics, music, poetry, and law, among other domains, he gathered whatever biographical information he could. Outliers, Galton concluded, are remarkable in 3 ways. They demonstrate unusual ability in combination with exceptional zeal and capacity for hard labor. After reading the 50 pages of Galton's book, Darwin wrote a letter to his cousin, expressing surprise that talent that made a short with essential qualities. You have made a convert of the opponent in the sense of Darwin, for I have already maintained the acceptance who may differ in much in interest on the zeal and hard work. I still think these are elementary important differences. Of course, Darwin himself was a sort of high achiever Galton was trying to understand. Widely acknowledged as one of the most influential scientists in history, Darwin was the first to explain diversity in animal species as a consequence of natural selection. Readily, Darwin was an astute observer, not only of flora and fauna, but also people. In a sense, his vocation was to observe slight differences that lead, ultimately, to survival. So it's worth pausing to consider Darwin's opinion on the determinants of achievement, that is, his belief that skill and hard work are ultimately more important than intellectual ability. On the whole, Darwin's biographers don't claim the supernatural intelligence. He was certainly intelligent, but insight didn't come to him in dazzling flashes. He was, in a sense, a plotter. Darwin's own autobiography corroborates this view, and have no great quickness of the appreciation that is so remarkable in some clever men. He admitted My power to follow a long and purely abstract train of thought is very limited. He would not have made a very good mathematician, his thinks, nor a philosopher, and his memory was subpar, too. So, for once his memory, I've never ever remembered for more than a few days a single date or line of poetry. Perhaps Darwin was too humble, but he had no problem praising his bad observation and assiduous with each upright understanding the laws of nature. I think superior to the common run of the man of noticing things which escape attention and reserving them carefully. My industry has been nearly as great as it could have been in the observation and collection of facts. What is far more important, my love of natural science has been steady and ardent. One biographer describes Darwin as someone who kept thinking about the same questions long after all others would move on to different, and no doubt easier, problems. The normal response to being puzzled about something is to say, I'll think about this later, and then, in effect, forget about it. With Darwin, one feels that he deliberately did not engage in this kind of semi-willful forgetting. He kept all the questions alive at the back of his mind, ready to be retrieved when a relevant bit of data represented itself. 40 years later, on the other side of the Atlantic, the Harvard psychologist named William James took a question of how people differ in the pursuit of goals. Toward the end of his long and distinguished career, James wrote Society and now the premier academic journal, not just for psychology, but for all the natural and social sciences. It was titled The Energies of Man, reflecting achievements of the failures of close friends and colleagues, and how, according to his own efforts, varied on his good and bad days. James observed, compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. Our fires are damped, our drafts are checked. We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. There is a gap, James declared, between potential and actualization. His design and talents might be more musical than athletic, more entrepreneurial than artistic. They asserted that the human individual lives usually far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts which he habitually fails to use. He energizes below his maximum, and he behaves below his optimum. Of course, there are limits. James acknowledged the trees don't grow into the sky, but the outer boundaries of where we will eventually stop improving are simply irrelevant for the vast majority of us. The plain fact remains that the world possesses amounts of resources which only very exceptional. It was a push to the extremes of use. These words, written by in 1907, are true today as ever. So, why do we place such emphasis on talent and fix it on the extreme limits of what we might do when, in fact, most of us are at the very beginning of our journey, so far away from those outer boundaries? And why do we assume that it is our talent, rather than our effort, that we decide? We long run, for years, several national surveys. Which is more important? Success, talent. Asking American about athletic ability. We ask if you were hiring a new employees. Think is the most important. Americans endorse being hardworking nearly 5 times as often as they endorse intelligence. As a result of these surveys are consistent with questionnaires the psychologist Chair Young said had given to musical experts who, when asked, reliably endorsed for training as more important than natural talent. But when Gia Pop's attitude more industry, she exposes a bias that tips in exactly the opposite direction. We love naturals. In Chia's experiments, professional musicians learn about two pianists whose biographies are identical. In terms of prior achievements, the subject listened to a short clip of these individuals playing piano. Unbeknownst to the listeners, pianists, in fact, playing different parts of the same piece. What varies is one pianist is described as a natural, the innate talent. The other is described as evidence of high motivation or perseverance. In direct contradiction to their stated beliefs about the importance of effort versus talent, musicians judge the natural to be more likely to succeed and more hireable. As a follow-up study, Chia tested whether the same inconsistency would be evident in a very different domain, where hard work and striving are celebrated. Entrepreneurship. She recruited hundreds of adults with varying levels of experience in business and randomly divided it into groups. Half of her research subjects read the profile of the striver, entrepreneur described as having achieved success through hard work, effort, and experience. The other half read the profile of natural entrepreneur described as achieved success, inevitability. Participants listened to the same audio recording. The business proposal made a specific entrepreneur read about. As in her study of musicians, Chia found that naturals were rated higher for likelihood of success and being hireable, and that their business proposals were judged superior in quality. In a related study, Chia found that people were forced to choose between backing one of the entrepreneurs, one identified as a striver, the other a natural. They tended to favor the natural. In fact, the point of indifference in striver natural was only reached when for more years of leadership experience, $40,000 more in startups capital. Chia's research pulls back the curtain on their ambivalence toward talent effort. What we say that we care about may not correspond with what deep down we actually believe to be more valuable. It's a little like saying we don't care about our physical attractiveness in a romantic partner, and then, when it comes to actually choosing whom to date, picking that cute guy over the nice one. The naturalness bias is a hidden prejudice against those who what they have, and because they work for it, and a hidden preference for the whom they seem arrived at the place in life because they are naturally talented. We must admit to others this bias is natural. We may not even admit it to ourselves, but the bias is evident in the choices we made. This is just an interesting example of the natural versus striver phenomenon. Now, as professor at University College London, she publishes her scholarly work in the most prestigious academic journals. As a child, she attended classes at Juilliard, whose pre-college program invites students to exhibit their talent, potential, accomplishment to pursue a career in music to experience and an atmosphere artistic gifts and technical skills can flourish. She holds several degrees from Harvard. Her first was a bachelor's degree in psychology. She graduated from magna cum laude in highest honors. He also has 2 master's degrees, one in the history of science and the other in social psychology. And finally, While completing her PhD in organizational behavior and psychology at Harvard, she also picked up a secondary PhD in music. Impress it not, let me add that the chair also has degrees from the Peabody Conservatory in piano performance, pedagogy, and yes, it performed at Carnegie Hall, not to mention Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center, commemorating the presidency of European Union. If you only saw her credentials, you might be keep the conclusion that Cheer was born more gifted than anyone you know. My God, what an extraordinarily talented young woman! And if Cheer's research is right, that explanation would embellish her accomplishments with more luster, more mystery, and more awe than the alternative. My God, what an extraordinarily delicate, hard-working young woman! And then what would happen? Very talented. Oh, the higher expect the excel. Then expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've asked here what's make her accomplishments. Well, I guess I may have some talent, just said. I like me practice 4 to 6 hours a day all throughout childhood and in college. Despite punishing schedule and classes activities, she made time to practice almost as much. So, yes, she had some talent, but she was a striver too. Why did she practice so much? I wondered. Was it forced on her? Did her have any choice in the matter? Oh. In front of the crowded audience. In a year, I left Mackenzie for the teaching. 3 of the term's partners published a report called The War for Talent. The report was widely read and eventually became a best-selling book. The basic argument was that companies in the modern economy rise and fall depending on their ability to attract and retain. What do we mean by talent? In the most general, talent is the sum of the person's abilities. It is gifts, skills, and knowledge, experience, intelligence, judgment, attitude, character, and drive. It also includes your ability to learn. That's a long list. This reveals struck most of us when we try to define the talent with a precision. It didn't surprise me that intrinsic gifts are mentioned first. When Fortune magazine put Mackenzie on this cover, the lead article began. When in the presence of a young Mackenzie partner, one gets a distinct impression that his pride, a cocktail or 2, he might well lean across the table and suggest something awkward, like comparing SAT scores. It's almost impossible, the journalists observed, to overestimate the premium placed within Mackenzie culture analytic ability, whereas the denizens say, on being pride. Mackenzie is famous for recruiting devoting smart men and women, some with MBAs from places like Harvard and Stanford, and the rest, like me, who possess some other credential that suggests we must have very big brains. My interviews with Mackenzie unfolded, as most do, with a series of brain teasers designed to test my analytic mettle. One interviewer sat me down, introduced himself, then asked, "How many tennis balls are manufactured in the United States per year? I guess there are two ways to approach the question. I'll respond. The first way, the first person, maybe trade organization, to tell you. My interviewer nodded, but gave a look at the set. He wanted other kind of answer. Use some basic assumptions, some multiplying to figure it out. My interviewer smiled broadly, so I gave him what he wanted. Okay, assume there are about 250 million people in the United States. Let's say most active tennis players are between the age of 10 and 30. That got to be, roughly speaking, 1/4 of the population. I guess that gives you a little over 60 million potential tennis players. Now my interviewer was very excited. I continued the logic game, multiplying the dividing by numbers according to my completely uninformed estimates. How many people actually play tennis, and how often they play on average, and how many balls they would use in a game, and then how often they need to replace dead and lost ones. I got some number which was probably widely off, because at every step I was making another uninformed assumption it was. Finally, I said, the math here isn't that hard for me. I'm tutoring a little girl who is practicing fractions right now, and we do a lot of math together. If you want to know what it really do, if I need to know the answer to the question, I'll tell you. I just called someone who actually knows, more smiling, and then an assurance that he learned all he needed to interaction or my education, including my SAT scores, which Mackenzie heavily relies on to do the early sorting of candidates. In other words, if the advice corporate Americans create a culture that values talent above all else, Mackenzie practices what he preaches. Once I accepted and offered to join the New York City office, I was told that my first month was spent in a fancy hotel in Clearwater, Florida. There I joined about 3 dozen other new hires who, like me, lacked any training in business. Instead, each of us had earned some other academic badge of honor. I sat next to a guy with PhD in physics, for example. On my other side was a surgeon, and behind me were 2 lawyers. None of us knew that much about management in general, or about any industry in particular. But that was to change in a single month. He was complete a crash course called the Mini MBA. So we all varied better to the super fast learners. No question that we successfully mastered a massive amount of information in a very short amount of time. Newly equipped with casual acquaintances with cash flow, the differences between revenue and profit, and some other rudimentary facts about now new to call private sector new designated offices around the world, where we join the team of other consultants. Much of the cloud whatever problems they threw our way. I soon learned that Mackenzie's basic business proposition is straightforward. For a very large sum of money per month, company can hire a Mackenzie team to solve the problems too thorny to solve by folks who are already working on them. At the end of this engagement, as it were called in the firm, we were supposed to produce a report that was dramatically more insightful than anything I have generated in-house occurred to me, as I was putting together slides summarizing bold, sweeping recommendations for a multi-billion-dollar medical products conglomerate that really I had no idea what I was talking about. There were senior consultants on the team who may have known more, but there were also junior high consultants who, having just graduated from college, surely knew even less. Why hire us, then, at such an exorbitant cost? Well, for one thing, we had the advantage of an outsider's perspective untainted by insider politics. We also had a method for solving business problems that was a hypothesis data-driven. There were probably lots of good reasons CEOs brought in Mackenzie, but among them, I think, was that we are supposed to speed sharper than people who were already on site. Hiring Mackenzie meant hiring the very brightest, as if being the brightest also made us the best. According to the war for talent, the companies that excel are those that aggressively promote the most talented employees, while just as aggressively calling the least talented. In such...
やばい、ちょっと死んでる。いけるか。
Why? Because the competitive real environment. But on that empowerment.
ちょっと待って。8970ポイントもゲットした。ザオリック。よし、OK。
More accurately titled The War. Aptly titled. Companies highlighted in the original McKinsey report as exemplars of their endorsed strategies. They didn't do so in years after that report was published. Journalists now, Malcolm Gladwell has also critiqued a war for talent, and he epitomized the talent mindset approach to management advocated by McKinsey. As we all know, the Enron story doesn't have a happy ending. Once one of the largest energy trading companies in the world, was named America's most innovative company by Fortune magazine 6 years in a row. Yet, by the end of 2001, when the business filed for bankruptcy, it had become clear that the company's extraordinary profits were attributable to massive and systematic accounting fraud. When Enron collapsed, thousands of its employees, who had no hand at all in the wrongdoing, lost their jobs, health insurance, and retirement savings. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history. You can blame the Enron debacle on the surface of the IQ points. You can blame it on the lack of grit, either. But Gladwell argued that convincingly that demanding Enron employees proved that they were smarter than everyone else, advantageously contributed to the narcissistic culture with the overrepresentation of employees who were both incredibly smug and driven by deep insecurities keep showing off. It was a culture it could show the performance but discouraged long-term learning and growth. The same point comes true in the postmodern documentary on the Enron Code. Appropriately enough, the smartest guys in the room during the company's ascendancy is a brash and brilliant former McKinsey consultant. Performance and review system for Enron, grading employees annually and summarily firing the absolute level performance. If you were weak relative to others, you were fired. Inside Enron, this practice was known as rank and yank. Skilling considered it one of the most important strategies his company had, but ultimately it may have contributed to the work environment that rewarded deception and discouraged integrity. Is talent a bad thing? Are we all equally talented? No. The ability to quickly climb the learning curve of any skill is obviously a very good thing, and like it or not, Some of us are better at it than others. So why favor naturals over strivers? Natural over strivers was the downside of television shows like Got Talent. Separate children as young as 7 were added into 2 groups: those few children who are gifted and talented, and the many more who aren't. Very in the talent show being named a talent show. In my view, the biggest reason of preoccupation with talent can be harmful and simple. They send a message of other factors, including greed, don't matter as much as really do. Consider, for example, the story of Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott's office is just 2 doors down from mine, and he's a lot like other academic psychologists I know. He spent most of his working hours reading, thinking, and collecting data, doing statistics, and writing. He publishes his research in scientific journals. He knows a lot of polysyllabic words. He has degrees from Carnegie Mellon, Cambridge University, and Yale. He plays the cello for fun. But as a child, Scott was considered a slow learner, which was true. Basically, I got a kid, Scott explains, and that led to a problem with processing information from sound in real time. I was always a step or 2 behind the other kids in my class. So holding was his academic progress. In fact, that he was placed in special education classes. He was repeated 3rd grade. Around the same time, he met with a school psychologist to take an IQ test. In anxiety written test section, he described as harrowing. Scott performed so poorly that he was sent to the special school for children with disabilities. 14. That observed special education. So. Instead, he assumed that his lack of talent would be put a very low ceiling on my head due as his life. Meeting a teacher who believed that his potential was a critical turning point. A pivot from this is all you can do to or knows what you can do at the moment. Scott started wondering for the very first time, who am I? I'm a learning disabled kid with no real future, or maybe something else. And then, to find out, Scott signed up for just about every challenge his school had to offer. Latin class, the school musical, choir. He didn't necessarily excel in everything, but he learned it all. What Scott learned is that Scott was helpless. Something that Scott found he did learn very easily was a cello. His grandfather is a cellist in the Philadelphia Orchestra for nearly 50 years, and Scott had the idea that his grandfather could give the lesson. He did in the summer that Scott first picked up the cello, and he began practicing 8 or 9 hours a day. He was fiercely determined to improve, and not only because he enjoyed that cello. I was so driven to just show anyone that was intellectually capable of anything. At this point, I didn't even care what it was. Improve he did. By the fall, he earned a seat in his high school orchestra. If the story ended there and then, it might be about greed. But here's what happened next. Scott kept up and even increased his practicing. He skipped lunch to practice.
Sometimes he skipped classes to practice. By senior year, second chair, he was second best cellist in the New York. He was in the choir too, and winning all kinds of awards from the music department. He also started classes, in many of which are Glenn honors classes. Almost all of his friends gifted talented program, and Scott wanted to join them. He wanted to talk about Pareto, the mental puzzle, and learn more about oral learning. Of course, with the IQ scores from childhood, there was no such possibility. He remembered the school psychologist drawing a bell-shaped curve on the back of a napkin, pointing to the peak. This is average. And then moving to the left, and this is where you are. At one point, Scott asked, "Does achievement trump potential?" Scott shook his head and showed Scott that for intelligence comes to his own conclusion. Applied to the cognitive science program at Carnegie Mellon University. He was rejected. Rejection of letter doesn't specify why. Of course, there are great accomplishments. Through his scores, I had this grade. Scott recalls. I said, I am going to do it. I don't care. I can find a way to study what I want to study. And then Scott auditioned for Carnegie Mellon program. Why? Upper program are very hard at the SAT scores, focusing on study of musical attitude expression. In the first year, Scott took a psychology courses, and soon after, he added psychology as a minor. Transferred a major for upper psychology, and then he graduated Phi Beta Kappa. Like Scott, I took an IQ test early in my schooling and deemed it bright to benefit from gifted and talent classes. For whatever reason, maybe a teacher asked that it be retested. I was evaluated again the following year. I made a cut. I get you could say a borderline gifted. One way to interpret these stories of talent is great, but tests of talent stink. There's certainly an argument to be made that tests of talent, a test of anything else psychologists study, including grade, are highly imperfect. But another conclusion is that the focus on talent distracts us from something that is important, and that is effort. In the next chapter, I argue that as much as the talent counts, effort counts twice. Chapter 3, effort counts twice, not undated goes by the reads of the word talent. In every section of the newspaper, from the sports page to the business section, from profiles of actors and musicians in the weekend supplement, to front page for stories of rising stars in politics, allusions to talent abound. It seems that when anyone accomplishes a feat worth writing about, we rushes annoyed that individuals are extraordinarily talented. If we overemphasize talent, we underemphasize everything else. In the extreme, it's as if, deep down, we hold the following. For instance, a radio commentator draw comparison between Harry and Bill Clinton. He observed that both are unusually good communicators. But while her husband, Bill, is a gifted politician, Hillary has to consort herself into the Bill, or Bill is a natural, Hillary merely a striver.
The answer but obvious implication is that she'll never quite be his equal. I caught myself doing it too. When someone really impresses me, I might reflexively say to myself, "What a genius! I should know better." I do. So what's going on? Why does an unconscious bias over talent persist? A few years ago, I read a study of competitive swimmers titled "The Mundanity of Excellence." The title encapsulates the major conclusion. The most dazzling human achievements are, in fact, the aggregate of countless individual elements, each of which is, in a sense, ordinary. Dan Shamble, so sure that he completed the study, observed superlative performance of every confluence of dozens of small skills of activities, each one learned or stumbled upon, which have been carefully drilled into habit and then fitted together in a synthesized whole. There's nothing extraordinary or superhuman in any one of those actions. Only the fact that they are done consistently, incorrectly, and altogether produce excellence. But mundanity is a hard sell. When finished his analysis, Dan shared a few chapters with the colleagues. "You need to jazz it up," his friend said. "You need to make it people more interesting." When I called into the probe a few of his observations, I learned and became fascinated with the idea of talent. When we mean with swimmers himself, and for several years after the part-time coach, as a young assistant professor, Dan decided to depth a qualitative study of swimmers. In total, Dan devoted 6 years to interviewing, watching, and sometimes living and traveling with swimmers and coaches at all levels, from the local swim club to an elite team made up of future Olympians. Talent. Performance, which finally distinguishes at best. Almost denied to the rest of us, perhaps a physical, genetic, psychological, or physiological. Somehow, some don't, some athlete. I think Dan is exactly right, if he can't explain. Anyone else has done something jaw-dropping, amazing, we're inclined to slap their hand and say, "It's a gift." Nobody can teach you that. In other words, it is the health experience and training got someone to a level of excellence that is so clear beyond the norm. Dan points out that the biographies of great swimmers reveal many factors contribute to the ultimate success. Most accurate swimmers almost invariably had parents who were interested in the sport, had enough money to pay for coaching, travel to swim meets. That is important, crucial. Practice the pool over years and years with individual elements whose create understandable. It's easy to do, Dan explained, especially if one's only exposure to top athletes comes once every 4 years while watching the Olympics on television. The performance rather than in day-to-day training. Another point that he makes that the minimal talent needed to succeed in swimming is lower than most of us think. I don't think you mean to say that any of us could be Michael Phelps, I said. Do you? No, of course not, Dan replied. To begin with, the certain atomic advantages where we can train. I continue to say that some swimmers improve more than others, even if they try equally hard. Getting the same coaching? Yes. Greatest in many individual. And doable filmed hours and days, weeks and years produced excellence. You could see what he saw, that a high level of performance is, in fact, an accretion of mundane acts, but is that incremental mastery of mundane individual components explain everything? I wondered, is that all there is? Well, we all love mystery and magic, he said. I do, too. Then Dan told me about the day he got a watch rivalry games among Spitz swim laps. Spitz won 7 gold medals in the 72 Olympics and was a big thing before Michael Phelps, he explained. Retirement. Spitz showed he gets water Rowdy Gaines, who at that time held the world record in the 100 free. They did some 50s. In other words, 2 lengths of the pool, just sprints like little races. Gaines won most of them, but by the time they were halfway through, the entire team was standing around the edge of the pool just to watch Spitz swim. Everyone on the team had been training with the Gaines and knew how good he was. They knew he was favored to win the Olympic gold, but because of the age gap, nobody had swum with Spitz. One swimmer turned to Dan and said, pointed to Spitz, "My God, he's a fish." I could hear the wonder, dumb voice. Even a student of mundanity, it seems, is easily lulled into talent explanations. I pressed within a bit. Was it that sort of majestic performance, something divine? Dan told me to go Nietzsche. Nietzsche? The philosopher. What was a 19th century German philosopher have to say that might explain Mark Spitz? As it turns, Nietzsche, too, had thought long and hard about the same questions. With everything perfect, Nietzsche wrote, we do not ask how it came to be. Instead, we rejoice in the present fact as though they came out the ground by magic. When I read that passage, I thought of young swimmers. Icon Smith exited from that almost didn't seem human. No one can see in the work of the artist how it has become, Nietzsche said. That is the advantage, for everyone can see the act of becoming one, though somewhat cold. In other words, we want to believe that when Mark Spitz was born to swim in the way and no one else could. We don't want to sit on the pool deck and watch him progress from amateur to expert. We prefer excellence fully formed. We prefer mystery to mundanity. But why? What's the reason for fooling ourselves into thinking Mark Spitz didn't earn his mastery? A vanity or a self-love promotes study score. That's what undoubtedly occurred in my early days of teaching when I mistakenly equated talent, achievement, and by doing so, remove effort, my own consideration. So what the reality of greatness? Nietzsche came to the same conclusion. Great things are accomplished. One direction will bring everything and material, who seriously observe their own purpose every models incentives, who never tired come together, the means above or 10. What about talent? Nietzsche exemplar to the above all else craftsman did not talk about giftedness, inborn talents. One can name great men of all kinds who are very little gifted. Their acquired greatness became geniuses, as we put it. They all possess that seriousness of the efficient workman which first learns to construct the parts properly, fashion a great whole. They allowed themselves time for it because they took more pleasure in making the little secondary things well than the effective dazzling whole. In my second year of graduate school, I sat down to the weekly meeting with the visor. Medicine was a little nervous, but it had that effect on people, especially his students. The 60s, Margie had won just about every accurate psychology as the offer. Barrel-chested and baritone voices and study happiness. Cheerful is not word I used to describe. In the middle of whatever hours and saying, a report on what it done in the past week, I suppose, or our next test in the one's research study. I stared open-mouthed, trying to process what he had just said. Then I blinked. 2 years? Graduate school for 2 years. Silence. Then crossed his arms, frowned, and said, "You can do all kinds of fancy statistics. You somehow get every parent in school to return the consent from. You made a few insightful observations, but you don't have the theory. You don't have a theory for the psychology of achievement." Silence. "What's a theory?" I finally asked, having absolutely no clue as to what I was talking about. Silence. Stop reading so much and go think. I left the office and went into mine and cried. At home with my husband, I cried more. I cursed my body and my breath, aloud as well, for being such a jerk. Why was he telling me what I was doing wrong? Was praising for what he was doing right? You don't have a theory. Those words rattled around in my mind for days. Finally, I dried my tears, stopped my cursing, and sat down at my computer. I opened the word processor and stared at the blinking cursor, realized I hadn't gotten far beyond the basic observation, the talent, not enough to succeed in life. I hadn't worked out how exactly talent and effort and skill and achievement all fit together. A theory takes a blizzard of facts. Observation explains. In the most bare terms, the incomplete. It oversimplifies. With doing so, it helps us understand. If it aren't for short of explaining, I have been working on the theory of the psychology achievement since Marty scolded. I have pages and pages of diagrams, filling more than that work notebooks after more than a decade of thinking about it, sometimes alone, sometimes in partnership with close colleagues, and finally published data on simple equations that explain how you get from talent to achievement. Here they are. Talent is how quickly your skills improve when you invest effort. Achievement is what happens when you take your acquired skills and use them. Of course, your opportunities, for example, having a great coach or teacher, matter tremendously too, and maybe more than anything about that individual. My theory doesn't address these outside forces, nor is luck. It's about the psychology of achievement, but because psychology isn't all that matters, it's incomplete. Still, I think it's useful. What this theory says is when we consider individuals and identical circumstances, what each achiever depends on just two things: talent and effort. How fast we improve a skill absolutely matters, but effort factors into calculations twice, not once. Effort builds skill at the very same time. Effort makes skill productive. Let me give you a few examples. The celebrated potter Warren Mackenzie, who lives in Minnesota. Now 90 years old, he has been his entire adult life. Early on, he and his late wife, also an artist, tried to a lot of different things. You know, when you're young, you think you can do anything, and we thought, oh, we'll be potters, you'll be painters, you'll be textile designers, we'll be jewelers, we'll be a little nonsense people. Better and more satisfying in staying an amateur at many different. Eventually, both of us gave up drawing and painting, gave up the textile design, and concentrated on ceramic work because during the 40 pots in a day. Out of these, some of them are good and some of them mediocre, and some of them are bad. Only a few will be worth selling, and of those, even fewer will continue to engage a sensitive after daily use. Of course, it's not just the number of good pots Mackenzie makes that has brought the artwork to his door. It's the beauty and form of the pots. Exciting things can make that will. Simplification, you might say that the number adoring beautiful, executive music pot Mackenzie is able to produce in total. In artists, it do not satisfy. Left eye, Mackenzie still throws the play on the wheel every day. His skill improved. I think back to some of the. They first started at the pottery, and they were pretty awful. They were good. They were the best we could make, but I was thinking were so elemental that the pots had quality of also, and so they don't have a richness about them which I look for in my work today. The first 10,000 pots are difficult, he had said. Easier, I think, go easier. Mackenzie improved.
produced more good parts a day. Talent X, effort X, and skill at the same time. Effort, Mackenzie has gotten better and better at making the most exciting things. I can make that will fit in people's homes at the same time. With the same invested effort, he has become more accomplished. Goff was a natural storyteller. This is a line from John Irving Forbes, a novel, The World According to Goff. Like that novel's fictional protagonist, Irving tells a great story. He has been a great storyteller. American literature today. To date, he has written more than a dozen novels. Most have been bestsellers, half of which have been made into movies. The World According to Goff won the National Book Award, and Irving's screenplay for The Cider House Rule won the Academy Award. But unlike Goff, Irving was not a natural. While Goff could make things up one right after the other, and then seemed to fit, Irving rewrites draft after draft of his novels. Of his early attempts at writing, Irving has said, most of all, everything I began to take my lack of talent seriously. Irving recalls earning a C in high school English, C Berber score for 175 out of 800, which means almost 2/3 of the students who took SAT did better than him. He needed to stay in high school an extra year to have enough credit to graduate. Irving recalls that his teachers thought he was both lazy and stupid. Irving was neither lazy or stupid, but he was severely dyslexic. I was an underdog. If my classmates could read history 7 in an hour, I allowed myself 2 hours sleep. If I could learn to spell, I would keep a list of my most frequently misspelled words. When his own son was diagnosed with dyslexia, Irving finally understood why he himself been such a poor student. Irving's son read noticeably slower than his classmates. With his finger followed the sentence, as I read, as I still read. Unless I've written it, I've written whatever. It is very slowly and with my finger. Since reading and writing didn't come easily, Irving learned that to do anything really well, you have to overextend yourself. In my case, I learned that I just had to pay twice as much attention. I came to appreciate that in doing something over and over again, something that was never natural becomes almost second nature. You learn that you have the capacity for that, and that it doesn't come overnight. Do the precociously talented learn that lesson? Do they discover that capacity to do something over and over again? To struggle, to have patience, can be mastered, but not overnight. Some might, but those who struggle early may learn it better. One reason I have confidence in writing the kind of novels I write is that I have confidence in my stamina to go over something again and again, no matter how difficult it is. After his 10th novel, Irving observed, rewriting is what I do best as a writer. I spend more time revising a novel or a screenplay than I take to write a first draft. It's become an advantage Irving has observed. With the inability to read and spell as fluently as others in writing the novel, it doesn't hurt anybody to have to go slowly. It doesn't hurt anyone as a writer to have to go over something again and again. With daily effort, Irving became one of the most masterful and prolific writers in history. With effort, he became a master, and with effort, his mastery produced stories that have touched millions of people, including me.
Grammy Award-winning musician and Oscar-nominated actor Will Smith has thought a lot about talent, effort, skill, and achievement. I've never really viewed myself particularly talented, he once observed. Well, except the ridiculous, sickening work ethic accomplishment. You might be smarter than me, you might be sexier than me. Nine category. First, researchers have said idea in a study of design to understand the characteristics of people live happier. Sophomore sat on treadmill for up to 5 minutes. The treadmill was set at such a steep angle, cranked up to such a fast speed that the average by design, a treadmill, not just physically but mentally, by measuring and physical fitness. Treadmill test gauge stamina and strength of will. But peculiar, Harvard researchers knew that learning hard was a function of aerobic capacity and muscle strength. Before punishment with severe decades, psychiatrists notes from the researchers noted for each man was income, career advancement, sick days, social activities, self-report satisfaction with work and marriage, with the psychiatrists. All that's even competitive as a good psychological adjustment in adulthood. It turns out runtime in the treadmill test of rated 20 was surprisingly reliable predictor of psychological adjustment. George treadmills were also a function of how physically fit these men were in the youth, and that this finding may indicate that physical health predicted later psychological well-being. However, they found that adjusting for baseline physical fitness had little effect on the correlation of running time with mental health. In other words, and when it comes to you have we held marathon of life, Apple's cameras can mystery, how long would you have? At yours recently, not because in my eyes, George himself paragon great. Early in his career, not long after completing his residence in psychiatry, George discovered that treadmill data along with all the other information a man collected to that point, like a baton. When researching another, the dwindling interest in the energy until it got to him. George revived the study. He reestablished the contact with the man by mail and phone, and in addition, interview each person traveling all corners of the world to do so. Now in his 80s, George has outlived most of the men in the original study. Currently writing for his first book, and by now, longest continuous study of human development ever undertaken. In answer to my question, to admit perseverance, George replied, "Oh, I'm not all that persistent. When I do crossword puzzles on his airplane, I always look at the answers when I was a little bit frustrated. So, not very gritty when I look at crossword puzzles. And when something broken in the house, I turn it over to my wife, and she fixes it. So you don't think you're gritty?" I asked. The reason why the Harvard study works is that I have been doing it constantly and persistently. It's the one board I've kept my eye on because I'm fascinated by it. There's nothing more interesting than to watch people grow. And then, after a short pause, George recalled his days at prep school as a varsity track athlete. Competing in pole vaulting improved. He and the other vaulters did pull-ups, which he calls chins, and because by hanging off the board and then pull yourself at the one chin hovers just above. Then you drop down again. Repeat. I could do more chins than anyone, and it wasn't because I was very athletic. I wasn't. The reason is that I did a lot of chin-ups. I practiced. The prolific writer and director Woody Allen, when asked about his advice, young artist once said, "My observation was that once a person actually completed a play or a novel, although he was well on his way to getting it produced or published, as opposed to the vast majority of people who tell me their ambition is to write, but who strike out on very first level. They never write a play or book, or in an Alan Snappier formulation, 80% of success in life is showing back in the 1980s. Mario Cuomo frequently repeat a bit of wisdom in speech after speech, turning the saying into something of meme. So while these leaders of Republican Democratic parties must have disagreed on a great many things, they were in complete consensus on the importance of following through on what one has started. I told George Valence of our Harvard research team in 1940. I would have made a suggestion. I would have allowed the young man to come back the next day if they wanted to let me test again. I suspect that some would have come back to see if they stay on longer, while the others would have been content with their first timed effort. Maybe some would ask the strategies, physical, mental, maybe. Create a great how many times member until return to see if they could improve. Staying on the treadmill is one thing, and do think it's related to staying true to commitment when comfortable. But getting back on treadmill the next day, eager to try again, is in my opinion even more reflective of grit. Because when you don't come back the next day, when you permanently turn your back on that commitment, your effort plummets to zero. As a consequence, your skills stop improving at that time. You stop producing anything with whatever skills you have. The treadmill is in fact an appropriate metaphor. By some estimates, about 40% of people who get less than expected. How hard we push ourselves in a given workout matters, of course, but I think the bigger impediment to the progress, and sometimes we stop working out altogether. As any coach or athlete will tell you, consistency of effort over the long run is everything. How often do people start down with pass and then give up on the entire? How many treadmills, exercise bikes, and weight sets at this very moment gathering dust in basements across the country? How many kids go out for a sport and then quit even before the season? How many of us vow to knit sweaters for our friends, but only manage half a sleeve before putting down the needles? Ditto for home vegetables diet, and how many of us start something new full of excitement and good extensions and then give up permanently when we encounter the first real obstacle, the first long plateau in progress? Many of us quit when we start to hurry far too often. Even ready person puts in on a single day. Next, ready to get on the treadmill and keep going. If I have the math approximately right, then someone twice as talented but half as hard working as another person might reach the same level of skill but still produce dramatically less of a time. This is because as strivers are improving in skill, they are also employing these parts, write books, direct movies, give concerts. If the quality and quantity of those movies natural skill by working harder will, in the long run, accomplish more. A separation of talent and skill. This Smith points out is one of the greatest misunderstood concepts for people who are trying to excel, who have dreams, who want to do things. Talent naturally. Skill is only developed by hours of being on your craft. I would add the skill to no same thing as achievement. Either without effort, your talent is nothing more than your unmet potential. Without effort, your skill is nothing more than what you could have done, but it didn't. With effort, talent becomes skill at the very same time. Effort makes skill productive. Chapter 4. How great are you? Recently gave a lecture on grade and undergraduate。グリッドチャプター3までいったんでこれ終わりにします。はい。じゃあここで。いやー結構、いっぱい読みましたね。すごい読んだ。いやーほとんどゲームそっちのけで、いっぱい読んでました。今日は2時間ですね。というわけでレベル3ぐらい上げた感じですかね。いやーちょうど2時間。違う。これいいですね。ここで終わりにします。